Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time you happen to be listening to this. So we're still in the same time period, 1800 to 1860s, but we are going to talk religion, romanticism, and reform. Um, yeah, okay, moving on. Our textbook guy.
At the same time that the number of enslaved African Americans was increasing dramatically during the first half of the 19th century, so too was the activism of the anti-slavery movement, centered in the North and increasingly aggressive in its efforts to promote an end to slavery. Some of them wanted an immediate end to slavery. They were called immediatists in that regard, or abolitionists. Others talked about a gradual ending of slavery by preventing it from expanding beyond the South. They were often called anti-slavery activists. Whatever the cause, however, the efforts to stop slavery and eliminate slavery over the long run greatly angered slaveholders in the South and created increasing sectional tension that would ultimately lead to the Civil War. The anti-slavery movement used a variety of tactics, from propaganda, that is what they published a variety of pamphlets. They wrote newspaper columns. They organized rallies, to explicit efforts to help slaves escape and run away through what was called the Underground Railroad, a series of halfway houses that enabled slaves to move to the north if they had escaped from a plantation or from a city in the south. So through all of those efforts, anti-slavery became probably the largest and most active social activity in American life by the 1850s. And ultimately, of course, it would be one of the factors that would lead the South to secede from the Union, and of course the Civil War would begin.
Alrighty, textbook guy, thank you. Alright, so we'll start with religion here. So, deism. So, the first half of the 19th century, it saw the emergence of new forms of religion in America. This is a byproduct of the Enlightenment. Deists were skeptical of Christianity, miracles, and the divinity of Jesus. You have Unitarianism. This is going to be the belief that Jesus was not divine, just a good person. While Universalism is going to proclaim salvation for all people, not just a chosen few. So some very different takes on Christianity and religion. And we move into the Second Great Awakening. So it's in the midst of these transformations of Protestantism that the Second Great Awakening occurs in the United States. So remember, the First Great Awakening is going to really start to kind of incentivize people. It's going to encourage them to join the churches. But now we have the Second Great Awakening. And this is going to be an attempt to stave off the rise of secularism. Preachers travel across the nation leading revivals. Very much in the style of what happened during the First Great Awakening. In many instances, farmers moving west soon outpaced the speed with which established churches could follow. So by hosting revivals in the backwoods of the states, the circuit riding preacher and the phenomena of the camp meeting were established. Let's see, revival fires in western New York were said to have set so many people on fire for the Lord that it was labeled the burned over district. The most successful of the evangelical preachers was Charles Finney, who converted over 100,000 people. The Mormon Church was founded by Joseph Smith. The Mormon faith asserted that Christ had come to the Americas to preach to a lost tribe of Hebrews. Smith gathered like-minded followers around him, but the Mormons would be pushed out of several cities until settling in the Utah Territory. And when they originally settled in the Utah Territory, it was actually still Mexico. And so they were, Joseph Smith was actually, he was arrested for treason against the United States for talking about moving into Mexico and whatnot, and he was actually killed in jail. And so Brigham Young takes over, and he's the one who actually moves them to the Utah Territory near Salt Lake City. All right, so this is a prayer meeting. So these frontier revivals, the prayer meetings, they're going to ignite religious fervor with both ministers and participants. This is Brigham Young. He was the president of the Mormons for 30 years. And after the Mexican-American War, when we gained Utah's territory, and Utah eventually becomes a state, Brigham Young actually becomes the governor of Utah. This is the movement of the Mormons. They start here up in New York, kind of move down. We get down to Missouri, kind of travel around here, end up in Illinois for a while and whatnot, and they eventually settle in Salt Lake City. So there's still a concentration of Mormons in Salt Lake City today. All right. Let's see. Transcendentalism. So this is the belief that those things that could not be proven by science were justified by faith, and that everyone held with them a spark of divinity. I would like to think that I have some divinity. Anyway, so we have some writers that kind of base off of that theory. So Ralph Waldo Emerson is actually kind of the leader of the Transcendentalist movement, and he is the greatest writer of the Romantic era. He promotes individualism and independence, and he serves as a mentor to Thoreau, whose essay Civil Disobedience would be the rallying cry of Martin Luther King Jr. and Mahatma Gandhi many, many, many years later. Let's see. This is a painting by Asher B. Durant. So Native American saluting the sun captures the romantic ideals of personal spirituality and the uncorrupted natural world. And this is our friend Thoreau. And he was an abolitionist, lifelong abolitionist. All right, so as far as our continuing literary giants here, the 19th century is going to see the birth of American literary movement. Kind of up until this point, we really didn't have a lot of literature coming out of the United States. Most of our literature was coming into the United States. But during this time period, we get authors like Nathaniel Hawthorne, Herman Melville, Walt Whitman, and they're going to publish their classic works. You have writers like Emily Dickinson, Edgar Allan Poe, who are also going to bring their views to the forefront of American society. At the same time that these American best-loved classics are being printed, you have the technology of the steam engine, which is going to be applied to the newspaper press. This is going to increase the capacity to print papers by a factor of 5. So the mass production of these papers is going to drive the price down to a penny, and newspapers soon become a popular form of entertainment. Man, newspapers today would die to be a popular form of entertainment. Let's see. This is a painting, 1848, by Richard Catton Woodville. Politics in an Oyster House. So newspapers are often going to fuel public discussions and debates. All right. More reform going on. We have the temperance movement. It's going to try to ban the consumption of alcohol in all forms in the United States. It does eventually succeed with the passage of the 18th Amendment in 1918, and then proceeds to fail, and we have to pass the 21st Amendment, which repeals the 18th Amendment. On the other side of things, we've got asylums and prisons during this time. We're going to go from places to keep those deemed unfit to exist in society to centers for rehabilitation, reflecting the romanticism of the day. You've got Dorothea Dix, who is most credited with starting this reform through her investigation of the jails and asylums in Massachusetts over a 2-year period. In prisons, oftentimes, not only did you have the criminals, you had the mentally ill. So although an asylum really isn't that much better, and it's still a place to store your mentally ill family members, it's definitely better than having them alongside the criminals. This is a temperance banner from 1850. Depicts a young man being tempted by a woman, offering him a glass of wine, that evil, evil woman and her wine. All right. Women's rights. The statutes of women remain much like it had been in the colonial era. They were mainly regulated to working at home and had no legal control over themselves or their property. This time period would see the emergence of the women's movement, led by Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton. And although these leaders would not be successful immediately, they would lay the foundation for the regressive changes for women that occurred in the 20th century. So it does take some time, but it does eventually happen. And Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton are always considered the women who started the movement. Between 1800 and 1900, you have over 100 utopian communities which were going to be founded, made up of individuals wishing to create a perfect society. They do not last long and most would disappear because often they had these crazy ideas, such as, what's it called? There's one that didn't believe, Mother Ann. That might not be her name. Anyway, she didn't believe that sex was necessary, and so all of the Shakers, that's it, the Shakers, they don't believe in sex and reproducing, and so their population grew by people who converted and adoptions. So that does not last past the late 1800s. Let's see. This is going to be Elizabeth Cady Stanton on the left, and Susan B. Anthony on the right. So Stanton forged the thunderbolts and Miss Anthony hurled them. All right, which is why you hear more about Susan B. Anthony. Okay, as far as public schools go, in the 1830s, public schooling is unheard of. If a family wanted their children taught, they sent them to a private school. They arranged for a tutor or they taught them themselves, and oftentimes kids just didn't get educated. This is going to change mid-century when you have the first public schools are going to be created in the North and advocated for by Horace Mann in Massachusetts. Colleges had existed in the New World since the founding of the colonies, but since they were associated with a religious denomination, they did not receive any kind of public funds. Again, these things start to change. All right. This is a George Barrow Emerson School in Boston, circa 1850. Higher education for women initially met with some resistance. You have seminaries like this one that started in the 1820s and 30s that taught women mathematics, physics, and history, as well as music, art, and social graces. You did have women getting educations. You did have women going to college and getting degrees. But oftentimes it was in teaching or something like that, a woman's work. You would have a lawyer or a doctor here and there, but it was very uncommon. All right, so our anti-slavery movement that our textbook guy talked about at the beginning. It was first organized emancipation movement was intended not to merely free the slaves, but to return them to Africa, because although we don't think they should be enslaved, they also don't think they're equal. The American Colonization Society secured land in Africa, but very few people were ever sent there. Let's see. At first, the anti-slavery movement tried to keep slavery from the new territories, but when this proves to be impossible, it changes from gradually lowering the number of slaves by limiting the slaveholding areas to the abolition of slavery. The anti-slavery movement was entwined with that of women's rights, and the ability of women to participate in it caused a rift and the creation of a new group. Freedmen in the abolition movement were expected to defer to its white members, because again, blacks are not equal. Men such as Frederick Douglass refused to accept this status and instead toured the United States, raising awareness of the treatment of slaves. You have Sojourner Truth, who was another African American who brought the plight of the slaves to the public. So many people in this chapter. This is William Lloyd Garrison. He was a vocal abolitionist and advocate of immediate emancipation. Our Grimke sisters, Sarah and Angelina. After moving away from their slave-holding family, they devoted themselves to abolitionism and feminism. This is going to be Frederick Douglass and Sojourner Truth, both leading abolitionists and captivating orators. People enjoyed hearing them speak. All right, so what do people think of abolition? There's a lot of opposition to it, not only from those in the South, but also like-minded Northerners. Even some states that did not hold slaves did not wish to grant rights to them. Again, they may not think that slavery is okay, but they do not think they're equal. Proponents of slavery argued that the conditions that slaves lived in were better than those they had experienced in Africa, and that they experienced better and longer lives. So they're trying to argue slavery by saying, well, they got better than they got in Africa. Thomas Jefferson wrote that slavery should be abolished. A race war would erupt between whites and blacks over past injustices. And that is all we have in this chapter today. We are moving ever closer to the Civil War and what divided our country. But as we've been talking for the last couple of chapters, hopefully you've been seeing what has been dividing our country. There's a very clear divide between the North and the South. Free states, slave states, manufacturing versus agriculture. A big divide and gap is growing. So we will continue on towards the Civil War. So I hope you have a good morning, afternoon, or evening, and I will see you soon. Bye.